we talked about this traditore. The translator's a traitor. And when we originally discussed this, I said, you know who we have to talk about here? Abraham ibn Ezra.
Okay.
Ibn Ezra was this rabbi who lived from 1089 to 1164. He started out in Spain, ended up in Italy, and he was one of the great commentators of the Tanakh in Hebrew. And this is an incredible introduction he gives to his commentary on the Torah. And I want to just share a little bit about that. He says, the fifth way is the foundation upon which I will lay my commentary, to elucidate scripture in accordance with its style, its grammar, and its plain meaning. Only concerning the commandments and statutes will I rely on our ancestors, and here's the key part, and I will correct the grammar of our language in accordance with their words. In other words, if our rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud give us an interpretation of what something means, and it's contrary to the language and the context, I'll just change the rules of language. That's what he says. He says, heaven forbid that I should sin against my creator to send my tongue against the sages who are noble in their wisdom and their deeds, more so than all of the wise men of the generations that came after. Anyone who sins against them causes violence to his soul, and anyone who goes outside their words, his blood is upon his own head. He will be separated from the congregation of the exile and shall descend alive down into Sheol. And then he says, so in other words, when it comes to a practical commandment, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Doesn't matter what the rules of the language are. I'm required to follow what the rabbis say. It says, 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. And language defines for me what work is and what rest is. I have to ignore language, and I have to accept what the rabbis say is binding, even when it's contrary to language. We're going to twist and adapt. He says fix here, I think. He says, I will correct the grammar of our language in accordance with their words. So I'm going to adapt the meaning of I'm going to go and change the grammar to fit with what our sages say when it comes to practical commandments. And he goes on, he says, and this is really interesting. He says, only concerning a scripture that does not involve a commandment will I mention the correct interpretations of the ancient ones and the later ones, and will only fear God and not be a respecter of persons in matters of Torah. And that's really profound. What he's saying is, look, if there's some story in the Tanakh, about Abraham and whatever, there's no practical commandment. There's no practical application. I can interpret it any way I want, even contrary to what the rabbis say. But when it's something that I have to carry out in my daily life as a commandment of God, I've got to change the language to fit what the grammar, I have to change the language and grammar to fit with what the rabbis say. And it's interesting what he says at the end. He says, only then when I'm dealing with something that doesn't have a practical application in daily life, then I'm only going to fear God and not the rabbis, and not be a respecter of persons. So that phrase, be a respecter of persons, that comes from Malachi. Well, it starts in Leviticus 19:15. It says there, you shall not do corruption in judgment. You shall not respect the face of a poor person, nor glorify the face of a great person. In justice, you will judge your people. And that's so profound. What it's saying there in the Torah in Leviticus 19:15 is when you're a judge and you have to judge a situation, you might say, you know what? There's this court case between the rich guy and the poor guy. The rich guy, he's got enough. I'm going to find in favor of the poor guy, even though he's wrong. And that's called being a respecter of persons. And you might say the opposite. You might say, I mean, look, this guy, he's the noble person of the town. I mean, he's this rich guy. We're going to believe this poor guy, this bum over the rich guy. No, I'm going to trust the rich guy. Surely he's in the right. And the Torah says, don't be a respecter of persons in judgment. Only judge the truth. And by the way, there's this concept today in American politics called equity. And equity says it's wrong, it's injustice. Social justice is to play favorites and play favor of the poor against the rich, or in favor of a certain social group, or ethnic group in favor of the other ethnic group. That's a corruption of justice according to Leviticus 19:15. Justice is to follow the truth and not to be a respecter of persons. Now Malachi then takes that phrase and he says, and I have v'gam ani natati etchem nivzim u'shfalim l'chol ha'am kefi asher enchem shomrim et drachai. And I have made you despised and lowly before all the people because you do not keep my ways. V'nosim panim b'Torah, and you're respecters of persons in matters of the Torah. He's talking to the priests and the prophets of those days who say, you know, this great person said this is what the Torah says. This great person is teaching us what the Torah says, and it's not right. But we have to respect this person and modify our understanding of the Torah based on what this person says, rather than the truth. So Malachi directly rebukes people who do what Ibn Ezra says he won't do in matters of stories in the Bible, but in matters of commandments, he's bound to do it. So that's tricks of translations. And we have a beautiful example of how that's been brought over into the King James Version, but I want to talk about that into the plus.
Okay.
What Ibn Ezra talks about here hypothetically actually happens in the King James translation of Joshua 5:11, but we'll save that for the plus episode.